Hey everyone, I'm Morgan from Cook's Country, and today we're gonna give pork the royal treatment by making a crown roast. If you're hosting, a crown roast is gonna wow your guests and ensure everyone has enough to eat. But the special presentation presents some challenges to getting a nice, even cook on the pork. So let me show you how to navigate those challenges to get an evenly cooked, stunning crown roast every time. For a crown roast, we'll need 2 pork roasts that are similar in size to ensure a uniform crown shape. There are these bones called chine bones that can exist on the back of a pork roast. They're really hard to get through at home, so you should try to have your butcher remove those. Start by setting a wire rack in a rimmed baking sheet and spraying it with vegetable oil spray. Next, make a flavorful herb paste by combining a 1/4 cup of fresh thyme, 3 tablespoons of minced fresh oregano, and plenty of garlic. We're talking 12 minced garlic cloves. We'll take a tablespoon of that mixture and combine it in a bowl with some vegetable oil. And we'll save that for later. Then to the remaining herb mixture, we'll add 6 tablespoons of kosher salt, and a tablespoon of grated lemon zest, and 4 teaspoons of pepper, and stir it all up. Now that our herb mixture is all set, we'll move on to prepping our roast. We'll pat our roast dry with paper towels. This makes it a lot easier to work with, so it's not slipping and sliding around. If necessary, trim any fat to about a 1/4 inch thickness. Lay the roast fat side up on the cutting board. First, we're gonna French the bones. Using a sharp boning knife, we'll make straight cuts across the bones, 1½ inches down from the tips of the bones. You can use a chef's knife here if you don't have a boning knife, but a boning knife adds a little nice flexibility. Carefully carve meat off the top of the bones from that initial cut. Run your knife along the bones as close as possible and use the bones as a guide. For each step of prep, I'm doing it on both roasts and then moving on to the next step. This helps with muscle memory and makes it much easier to just work your way through. Next up, you want to carve out the meat between each rib. You can use the previous cut as a guide and cut as close as possible to the bones. One of the benefits of doing this yourself is that you can save these pork trimmings to make a really flavorful pan sauce. So set about a cup of the pork trimmings aside. Now it is time to wrap our roast. We'll flip the roast fat side down and place it parallel to the counter edge with the tips of the bones facing away from us. Then cut slits into the loin in between every 2 bones, about 1 inch deep and 3 inches long. You want to have about 4 or 5 slits per roast. This just makes it a lot more flexible when you're going to shape the crown. Next up, we're butterflying. So we're positioning the roast with the bones pointing up and slicing into the center of the loin, stopping 1 inch from the bottom of the roast, going down the length of the roast in order to keep the roast intact. Then we'll rub the interior of each roast with 2½ tablespoons of that garlicky mixture. So between the 2 roasts, it's 5 tablespoons. Next up, we'll fold back those pork loins so they're back to their original shape and tie the roast together with twine at each slit we made. Now it's time to wrap our roast. So we'll place a 4-foot long piece of twine parallel to the counter edge and center one roast fat cap side up on the twine parallel to the counter edge. We're gonna place a second roast fat cap side down on top of the first roast. So the fat caps are facing each other and the bones are facing the same direction. Bring the ends of the twine up and around both loins, tying them together tightly. Then stand the assembled roast with bones pointing up. Rub the remaining 10 tablespoons of that garlicky mixture all over the roast. You wanna make sure you get all the sides, top, everywhere. Next up, we're gonna take a large piece of aluminum foil and crumble it into a 3-inch ball and stuff that into the center of the roast. I'm gonna gently push the edges of the roast inward toward each other to really make it a nice circle, and take another 4-foot piece of twine and tie it around the top right above the bones. This one's a lot easier to cinch, and actually I kind of want to go back and fix the bottom one and make it just a little tighter on the bottom. Now I'm going to transfer this to the fridge and let it rest for 12 to 24 hours, which is going to season the meat really nicely throughout. After refrigerating, we'll want to make sure the oven rack's the middle position and then preheat the oven to 250 degrees. Insert a temperature probe into the thickest part of one loin, about 1 inch below the bones. We really like using a thermometer probe here if possible, so you don't have to open the oven door to temp your roast. If you're looking, you ain't cooking. But if you don't have a probe, it's okay to just use a regular thermometer. And we'll cook the roast until the internal temperature reaches 135 degrees, which will take about 2½ or 3 hours. After reaching temperature, we'll remove the roast and the probe from the oven and turn the oven up to 450 degrees. Next, we'll brush the roast all over with our reserved herb oil mixture, and then once the oven's at temp, we'll return the roast to the oven and roast it until it's well browned, which will take about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll remove the roast from the oven, tend to it with foil, and let it rest 30 minutes to an hour. And while the pork rests, we'll make a pan sauce with the pork trimmings. To do this, we'll heat up some oil in a medium saucepan over medium-high heat until it's just smoking. Then add our reserved pork trimmings and cook until they're well browned all over. Then we'll stir in some shallot and minced garlic and cook until those are lightly browned, which will take about 2 minutes. Next, we'll deglaze with 2½ cups of chicken broth and 1½ cups of dry white wine. We'll also scrape up the bottom of the pan to loosen any brown bits. Next, we'll increase the heat to high, bring the sauce to a boil, and reduce it until it's reduced by about 3/4, which will take about 15 minutes. We're going to strain the mixture through a fine mesh strainer. We should have about a cup, but after I discard these solids, if it's a little over a cup, I can keep reducing it down a little bit. Off heat, I'm going to whisk in 10 tablespoons of cold butter, one piece at a time, until it's nice and incorporated. The sauce should have the consistency of a creamy salad dressing. After that, I'm going to whisk in a tablespoon of chopped fresh thyme and just a little splash of white wine vinegar. And that's the sauce. After the pork is rested, transfer it to a large platter. Remove the twine from the roast. I like to cut the 2 big pieces first and then cut the individual pieces of twine as I cut each chop. Slice the meat between the bones and serve with that delicious sauce. This also goes really well with some skillet roasted asparagus, fennel, and potatoes. Between the pork, the veg, and that sauce, there's a really beautiful plate. All right, y'all, let's eat. Oh yeah, it's so juicy, it's so tender. This pork chop is so evenly cooked. A lot of recipes tell you to blast these at really high heat, and granted, we did that a little bit at the end to get the color, but keeping it low and slow is what makes this so moist and so even throughout. This sauce is so light and bright from all that wine, but it's also plenty rich from all that butter, and then it has a nice little porkiness going on from those trimmings that we saved and actually used in the sauce. It is delicious on the pork. If you're hosting, people will be blown away when you bring out a crown roast. It's just like a massive piece of pork that's so impressive to look at. It's also really nice because you can do all the prep in advance and just pop it in the fridge and then just cook it day of when you're actually hosting, so you don't have to think about that. And I can't really think of anything that would be more delicious than an herb stuffed pork chop when you serve it. I love this roast, and I hope you try it at home. What is your go-to roast for when you're having company over? Let me know in the comments below, and go over to cookscountry.com to find other great recipes like this. What is a pig's favorite karate move? A pork chop. What is a pig's favorite social media? Insta-ham. What do you call a pig with 3 legs? Lean pork. And what do you call a pig with no legs? Ground pork. Like, there's so many good ones.